Now, on the other side of the sidewalk right here, we can see a good example of what the very coastal vegetation would look like. Coastal vegetation around the world has been highly decimated, but there's a lot of efforts to try and restore it for good reason, because it provides an important buffer between the ocean and where most people like to live, a little slightly further inland. Right, here's several plants that we can find that are native, such as, well, one of the big ones is this vine growing everywhere. It's Ipomoea pes-caprae, also known as the beach morning glory or goat's hoof. Being a morning glory is a member of the family Convolvulaceae, which is plants that mostly grow in a sort of vining form, while some grow as trees. And there's also, of course, more of the Casuarina equisetifolia and Banksia integrifolia. A lot of the plants here were definitely planted as part of the restoration effort, which is very good. And there's this grass here, this silvery looking grass, which I'll get a better shot of in a second. It's Spinifex sericeus, which is important to know that, is that Spinifex? It might actually be Kangaroo Grass. Whatever it is, it's definitely native. I'll talk about the Spinifex in a second. Of course, also we have Pandanus tectorius, a common plant of the tropical old world oceans, at least in the Pacific, certainly all throughout Polynesia and the east coast of Australia. There are quite a few species in Pandanus, including some other ones in Australia, but Pandanus tectorius is definitely the most widespread one. It wasn't clearly what I was calling Ipomoea pes-caprae. It's this vine growing all over the ground right here, pretty much everywhere, although there are a few other species growing amongst it, it seems. Out in the more open area, I can top of the grass I was trying to talk about, which is this silvery one right here. This is Spinifex sericeus. To be clear, in Australia, there's a grass that is commonly called Spinifex, but is found very commonly in the outback. There's a very dominant species there, but that's actually a member of the genus Triodia, and its colloquial name is just Spinifex, while this here, the genus name is Spinifex, which is mostly a genus confined to coastal areas of the tropical world. And there's also this plant, which I'm unfortunately able to see its cool flowers, has nice half-flowers just like the Scaevola toccata you see commonly in other parts of the Pacific. It is Scaevola calendulacea. Much more of a mat-forming kind of shrub with purple flowers. Very neat plant. Scaevola is a dominant genus in the family Goodeniaceae, and it is quite common in Australia. In fact, the whole Goodeniaceae family evolved in Australia. It's actually closely related to Asteraceae. It's sort of thought that Goodeniaceae was like sort of a branch of the Asteraceae, or would become the Asteraceae lineage that remained in Australia. It's what the plants that were not in South America that descended from a sort of Goodeniaceae, Asteraceae lineage evolved into. At least that's what I heard. More Casuarina equisetifolia. And of course, the Banksia integrifolia. If I can find a cool fruit, I'll show you what they look like, because it's really interesting. Now, one of the things to know about coastal plants is they can often be distributed over extremely wide areas and can seemingly break many of the rules we think we know about biogeography and occur across quite a few biogeographic regions. This mainly has to do with the way they distribute themselves and their proximity to the ocean being a great avenue to widely distribute themselves across the oceans. Many even have fruit that are specifically adapted to raft across the ocean to other places, and many will also get their seeds stuck in the feathers of nesting seabirds, which will then move them quite far across the sea. And as a result of this, many plants can have, as I said before, quite wide distributions, and there's a few patterns you can learn to recognize. Many plants, for instance, will have distributions across the tropical ocean, in the southeast Pacific, eastern Australia, and the islands Pacific, though not on the west coast of North and South America. Many will have basically that same distribution, but also include the Indian Ocean in it, so they'll be found in East Africa and along the coast of Arabia, Iran, India. And many others will be found only in the Atlantic, so West Africa and Eastern South America and the Caribbean. And many others will be found all throughout everywhere in the tropics. In the temperate zone, it's quite rare for coastal plants to cross from tropical into temperate, or from temperate into tropical regions in their distribution, though there may be some overlap between them occasionally. So in the temperate oceans, it's most common to find them perhaps in the North Pacific, so east coast of Asia, or east coast of Eurasia, say, west coast of North America. You might also find them, so I keep passing from dark to light here. I find them quite commonly in the North Atlantic or the South Atlantic. Although a South Atlantic distribution is a little bit odd because there's not so much land in the temperate South Atlantic. So yeah, important things to look out for when I say the distribution of these guys. Of course, there's quite a few different coastal habitats like mangrove, rocky shoreline, more sandy sand dune shorelines like the ones we have here. But in the true, and there's going to be quite a few plants you can also find in coastal areas and outside of coastal areas, but the really true coastal plants that thrive here and don't thrive much elsewhere probably number no more than like 200 species in tropical East Asia, Australia, Pacific Islands. It's a rather small flora, but it can be found quite broadly, generally speaking. In addition to the Ipomoea pes-caprae, there's a couple other vining plants you can find here, two in the pea family. There's Vigna marittima and Canavalia rosea. They're a little bit tricky to tell apart, and they both have trifoliate leaves like this, but if you can see the flowers, it's not too difficult. This one, right here in front of us, is almost certainly, in fact, it has to be Vigna marittima because that one has yellow flowers, while Canavalia rosea has purple flowers, and it's really that simple. See, a good example of one of those species twining up this vine right here, twining up the fence, I should say. I don't exactly know what the grass is right here. It looks kind of like Sporobolus virginicus, but I cannot be confident making that call. One more thing, I take it back. It's actually pretty easy to tell apart Canavalia rosea and Vigna marittima just by their leaves, because this guy with the big leaflets right here is Vigna marittima, while this plant with the much smaller leaflets that are differently shaped and I think darker is Canavalia rosea. And I know this because I found some of the flowers that are just about to bloom right here. So yeah, pretty easy to tell apart actually, my bad, but I should have researched a little bit better. Please forgive me. One more time. This guy with the smaller, darker leaflets is Canavalia rosea, while this one with the rather big leaflets is Vigna marittima. Thanks for watching and see you next time.